We've heard a lot this morning about the kind of backlash against ESG and net zero. Do you accept the premise that one is underway, or is that more of a media construct?
Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Dara Ulifon. I'm the Global Head of Advisory at South Pole. For those that don't know South Pole, we have two business lines. One is focused on sustainability and climate consulting. That's the business line that I lead. And then there is a second business line that's focused on carbon asset development. So everything from project development of carbon assets to commercializing carbon credits, to buying and selling carbon credits. So in terms of the fundamental question that you raised, I think undoubtedly we have seen a sentiment shift around ESG. If we look, for example, in the oil and gas sector, we see that a lot of the super majors have actually stepped back in terms of the investment they're putting into low carbon energy. We've seen other examples, for example, in the financial sector, where you've had some of the US players pulling out of the Net Zero Asset Managers Association, as well as the Net Zero Banking Alliance. And we even had a recent survey by the Conference Board that said 80% of sustainability executives are rethinking their ESG strategy in light of what's happened in the White House. But fundamentally, I think it's a more nuanced picture than the overall sentiment we see. For example, I was chatting to a senior client who works for a Middle East bank, and he was saying that despite what's happening in the world, they're still going to persevere with their strategy going forwards around net zero and trying to be a leader in that space. So we see a mixed picture, and we still see leaders in that space, and I'll talk more about some of the examples of the leaders.
Absolutely, and if you look at that big picture, so the actual investment flows, you're still seeing the International Energy Agency and others showing this market's booming in many ways. We're still seeing clean technology deployed at record rates all around the world, particularly in what Chris Stark was referring to as the electro states in Asia.
Exactly. Yeah.
Paul, I'll come to you next. For those who don't know, who are the Magical Mushroom Company? Sounds like you should be at Glastonbury rather than here, but fantastic name. Who are they? And yeah, same question to you. Are you seeing this sentiment shift that Dara referenced?
Yeah. Hello everyone, I'm Paul Gilligan. I'm the founder and CEO of the Magical Mushroom Company, and despite the fun name, we are a serious business. And our business is to disrupt polystyrene and help make polystyrene packaging a thing of the past. So that's something we're doing at a very large scale now. I could pretty much say industrial scale. Talk about Glastonbury. We are actually at Glastonbury because we're at one of the tents at Silver Haze, because it's got great acoustic properties as well. So we've got 25 2-metre acoustic discs we've made, which to keep the sound in an artist called Floating Points tent. So we're actually Glastonbury as well. So, but the bread and butter is the packaging. We've got customers ordering 5 million pieces a year now. To answer your question, yeah, we are seeing it, but I've always had a very different approach. I think as a business that we're really an industrial as well as a product which supplies a sustainable solution. So the first and most important thing as an industrial is to keep our people safe, which we do really well, and that's our job. The next one is obviously investor shareholder value. And the incumbent product we replace, it has to be as good at. And then most importantly, it has to be the same price. So my drive for the last 4 or 5 years is to get that price parity of polystyrene, and we've got there now. And the final flag we fly is, by the way, it's sustainable. It's biodegradable in 50 days naturally. And for every tonne that we displace, we avoid 5.5 tonnes of CO2 emissions. So.
And you deliberately do it in that order. The sustainability is the final part of the pitch. You're focused on the other sort of more core business competitiveness issues.
Absolutely, and to be able to disrupt this material, we have to have a sustainable business model. Most importantly, I know it's a buzzword about supply chain resilience, but actually that is the case, because rather than have to order 2 trucks of polystyrene, our main supplier draws down from us every week. So, but certainly in that order, and that's not recently, that's been for a while.
Laura, come to you. You work for AstraZeneca. I mean, how would you summarise the company's approach to net zero? And, have you seen any of these pressures from the media debate and some of the political sort of resonances that we're seeing at the moment?
Thanks so much, James, and it's a pleasure to be here today. Can you hear me okay?
Good.
Fantastic. Indeed, so AstraZeneca has been engaged in sustainability for many years now, and we've doubled down on our commitment about 5 years ago, and are pledging $1 billion, actually over $1 billion, to transition our business to net zero by 2045. We're already making great progress. So far, we're at about 78% in reduction of emissions from all of our R&D manufacturing sites and our car fleet around the world. So we're very much committed to this. We see this absolutely as the right thing to do, but key to our business resilience. And I think, government rhetoric comes and goes, media will have different perceptions, but we're absolutely committed to investment in sustainability for now and the long term.
And just, can you unpack a little bit how you make that business case? I mean, making a business case for $1 billion investment, even at a company of AstraZeneca's size, is a challenge. I mean, what are the sort of core, the elevator pitch that you put together to the board that gets you $1 billion? I mean, I would love to have that $1 billion to invest in all these different technologies.
Thanks, James. So actually, it really comes from the top. So our chief executive, Sir Pascal Soriot, is very, very committed to this agenda, and fundamentally that's because we're a pharmaceutical company. We're 90,000 people around the world, and we recognize that the health of people and the health of the planet are deeply interconnected, and that actually climate change and the changing environment is making people sick. 1 in 4 deaths around the world are attributable to the environment. 14 million people die every year due to environmental factors. So we know that people need to be living healthier lives, and we know that the external environment impacts that. And at the same time, we know that healthcare as a sector, so companies like ours, but also health systems, contribute to 5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. That's more than aviation. So we know as a sector we need to decarbonize, and we need to become more resilient as well.
And that resilience bit's key, that those risk factors are there, and they're only going to get worse, unfortunately. Excellent. Coming to Nick first from Tate & Lyle. Again, many people will know Tate & Lyle, but if you just give us a quick overview of where your net zero strategy currently sits, that would be great.
Sure, thank you, James, and good morning, everybody. Great to be here. Nick Hampton, I'm the CEO of Tate & Lyle, have been since 2018. For those of you who don't know us well, we're actually not a sugar company anymore. We sold our last sugar business back in 2010, and most of what we do today globally is help take sugar, calories and fat out of food, and try and create better nutrition for people globally in a world that desperately needs us. Look, we're fundamentally committed long-term to helping with climate change, and there's a good reason for that. Farm to fork, the food industry is responsible for over 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions every year. 2/3 of that sits in agriculture. So our biggest challenge actually as a company is Scope 3 and dealing with our Scope 3 emissions. That's complicated, and it's all about creating partnerships right the way back through our supply chain into farming. So in the last 7 years, we've reduced our flag emissions by 23%, but we're also dealing with Scope 1 and 2 because it makes a lot of sense from a business perspective. So we've got science-based targets, we're delivering against those targets, and we're on a pathway to net zero because it makes sense for our business, it makes sense for the future of the planet, and our customers and consumers are demanding it of us as well. So whilst there's a lot of short-term noise, and there's a debate about climate change versus resilience, they actually go hand in hand. When you're looking at agriculture and the challenges of floods, droughts around the world, you need a more resilient supply chain, and that requires choices in sourcing. It's not just about geopolitics. Climate has a big impact on our ability to serve our business. So a drought in France 3 years ago, for the first time we had to import corn into Europe from the US. You need to do that bringing in non-GM corn as well. So these are complex issues that we have to work on for the long term, and it'll wax or wane, but the companies that are going to win over the next 20 years will keep a consistent focus on their climate agenda, because it takes time. You can't do it overnight.
Is it difficult to sort of block out those noises off? Because as Dara mentioned, there is particularly in the investment space, we are seeing definitely some very high-profile investors temper their engagement with net zero and sustainability issues. Do you see any pressure coming through that you have to resist, or again, do you think that that's been a little bit overblown, and actually when you focus on your core business case, you still see a really compelling proposition here?
I see it as noise, if I was to be honest. As Laura said, you can create very, very compelling business case for investment in this area if you make the right investments. Looking back into agriculture, we're driving massive efficiencies through the agricultural system whilst reducing climate change. And that's really important because farmers have to make money. When you think about the four walls of your own facilities, investing in using less to make more has to make good business sense in the longer term. So, we spent over $200 million on green energy in the last 5 years. That's delivering a return for us. But it only delivers a return if we can get ahead of everybody else.
Yeah.
Because the demand for that energy today is outstripping supply. Our biggest challenge is actually accessing it and finding a way of accessing it. And if we can create a business case for it.
Yeah, again, there's something that's really lost in this debate is the extent there is a first mover advantage here. This is not necessarily something you want to defer because the costs could go up as the competition for those clean technologies increases. Excellent. I will come next to Tim, who is from Sapiens. Tim, for those who don't know, who are Sapiens? And just to round up this section, same question to you. Are you concerned about a shift in sentiment?
Yeah, hi, thanks for that. And thanks to the panelists. It's been really, really great content so far. So reflecting on this, I think the role that technology can play in helping be part of solving some of these, major challenges and opportunities for the world. Sapiens is one of those. It's a green tech unicorn born out of Germany. So using responsible AI, which is the engine that kind of powers our platform, we've kind of been able to create a platform for companies, some of the largest in the world, similar profile to some of the organizations here, to kind of cover off their compliance automation on one hand, which is something that's obviously driving a lot of action for people, but our background in traceability and transparency for the food supply chains and pharmaceutical kind of critical infrastructure has given us a really interesting view on global supply chains. And I think the whole kind of resilience, risk management and circularity piece is going to become more and more into play. Now, as I align it to some of the discussions that are happening here, I think you're hearing that some of the major companies in the UK and beyond are carrying on with their important sustainability programs. So there is a level of noise, I think. There's a level of sort of maybe short-term panic from some of the geopolitical situations. But what we're seeing is 100% year-on-year growth of customers and people, investing and reinvesting in ways to sort of improve their sustainable growth journeys and how it can actually have a positive impact on their business ROI. Those that are taking action now and continue to take action will be forging the future kind of business channels of tomorrow. So I think it's a positive, a cautiously optimistic and positive outlook from our experience with our business.
And are you seeing a shift in the terminology and the focus at all? Is this talk, talking to lots of people in the sector in recent months, and resilience is increasingly near the top of the agenda. Are you seeing a slight shift in how people, even if there is the same projects and the same problems they're trying to overcome, there's been a shift in emphasis?
One of the things, absolutely, I think the terminology, but not the path of what people are doing. I think that's a long-term, inexorable path that great companies like on this panel are actually taking action and they're not stepping back. The terminology ESG might be used slightly less frequently now, but what is underneath is still very much happening. So,
absolutely. This session is called Leading the Charge. I just want to move from slightly negative conversation to something a bit more upbeat. What examples have you got that you're seeing of people really at the cutting edge that are still leading the charge despite that kind of geopolitical turmoil that we're seeing currently? Dara, have you any particular examples you'd like to flag?
Yeah, so I think maybe just reflecting overall on what everyone's saying, I do think that where we've seen a little bit of the shift in emphasis is obviously around compliance, but I think to Nick's point, also around competitiveness. So where is there a win-win where you're both decarbonizing as well as creating value for the company? And then this point around resilience, which is all linked to how you adapt to the various sort of risks that are happening and be able to do that. So I think if we take as an example the area around resilience, some of what we've seen, from the clients we worked with a UK retailer, for example, that was really focused on the impact of physical climate risk on their assets, and they identified flooding risk as a really important priority for them. And not only did they figure out, how to do a really detailed, postcode level analysis on the assets that were most at risk, and therefore put in place specific either hard infrastructure or more short-term initiatives like sandbags to basically, be able to protect against the flooding risk hazard. But they also introduced real-time monitoring using geospatial analysis as well as river level sensors, so that they would be able to monitor in real time what the flooding risk would be. So that's an example of how they're already seeing that as a big priority for them, and they're managing to deploy that across all of their assets.
And lots of digital technologies, AI, satellite technologies, making that kind of work a lot easier and cheaper than it was even 4 or 5 years ago.
Absolutely. And I think it links also to, I know you haven't talked about it yet, but one of the challenges is all around data. And how do you get that decision grade data that allows you to make, ultimately a value creating decision for your business? Yeah,
absolutely. Paul, I think I was on a panel with you a couple of years ago, and you were then saying the big challenge was the price premium attached to your product. I mean, presumably where you're driving the charge is, as you say, you've now surpassed that moment.
Yeah, in the most part. We have where it's everything we do really is bespoke. So we do all our own tooling, and it's designed to fit on the product. So the ubiquitous pieces would always be a challenge, but in this market we can do it. But it has been a massive drive to do it, and it is. And I see it at the coalface, not just to, we're selling a secondary packaging solution. So there's many stakeholders to convince to bring it on, not least because it has been unproven to this point. But the more people that are brave, BA Kitchen Components, one of the biggest kitchen companies in the UK, they've done it. But they're now benefiting because they're the first. They'll always be the first because more are following now. But they're actually saving 1% a month by not using polystyrene in damages. So we're now proving those points now. But we've been quiet for a reason, really. There's no point going onto the public platform and saying this is what we're going to do. We've actually gone and done it, and it's taken a lot of hard work and engineering solutions to do it. We've got a fish box which we've patented, which we've proved, which has got a use in pharmaceuticals as well, potentially, which keeps fish cold for 2 weeks. We've got a letter of intent for £4.5 million for that, but that fishing company still won't pay 5p more for that box, and quite rightly. So, and we're getting close to that now. So it is impossible to scale a sustainable packaging solution unless you get the price, the business governance, the risk log. I mean, I've been amazed at how many people look to invest in the business and they don't ask me to see, number one, the risk log, or even to see an ISO certificate, which is so important to an industrial. An ISO certificate, you're looking at the wrong things. But conversely, we've got some funds. I'm not particularly looking for funds actually, but so they're changing the language. So whilst the mesh is still there, they're raising, the ceiling to what we can make a difference in terms of the carbon reduction. So I won't mention the name, they only invest in companies that can remove 100 megatons of CO2 emissions. Now that's equivalent to the CO2 emissions of Belgium, an industrialised country, and expecting us to be able to do that on an annual basis. So I think that's another way of saying they haven't got any money. But
Indeed. Laura, I'll come to you. When it comes to sort of being at the leading edge of these things, as a large, very, very large corporate, do you see risk there? How do you sort of make the case for clean technologies that might be, still a little bit unproven or still very, very early stage?
Thanks, James. It's a great question. And AstraZeneca is a science company, right? We develop some of the most cutting-edge medicines for cancer, respiratory disease, heart disease. We're kind of famous for the vaccine, but most of our business is actually in other areas, in oncology and biopharmaceuticals. And as a science and innovative company, we're used to taking risks. This is what we do. We know that you take risks and you fail, but you fail and you fail quickly and you learn and you move on. So it's part of our DNA. I think at the same time we know that it is a risk to not invest now in climate action, and that we need to invest now for the long term. So it's absolutely critical. The other thing I think that we realised is that we can't do this alone. So of course we're committing over $1 billion as AstraZeneca for to enhance our sustainability across the 120 sites, countries rather, where we operate. But we're also working with our peers and in some cases our competitors to drive more action together. So King Charles III, when he was Prince of Wales, actually set up a group called the Sustainable Markets Initiative, the SMI, about 5 years ago. And my chief exec leads the healthcare group. So we actually convene the CEOs of GSK, Novo Nordisk, Novartis, Sanofi, and we're all working together with the World Health Organization, the NHS, many other players in the health system to think, how can we decarbonize supply chains by coming together? So for example, in China, we've come together over the last few years. There's 15 plus companies, multinationals such as ourselves and Chinese suppliers who are now accessing high quality, cheaper, renewable energy from wind and solar. And we're doing that because we're doing that more effectively because we're doing it together. So we're driving a market signal and a demand signal there.
And how do you manage the working with competitors piece, both culturally and, again, part of the cover story for a lot of the banks, kind of the US banks pulling back on this was to say, we're going to get hit by competition law here. We can't be seen to be sort of collaborating with our rivals. How do you manage that kind of coming together for the greater good?
Yeah, it's a great question, James, and I think of course there's healthy competition in our sector as in all sectors, but we truly believe, and this is at the CEO level of AstraZeneca and other healthcare companies, that we need to come together, and actually sustainability and decarbonisation is an area where there is little competition challenge. Of course, we have lawyers working with us, and we do this in the right way to respect anti-competition challenges. But for the most part, we can work very effectively together by looking at what our demand is, and also our suppliers. Like colleagues here, our Scope 3 is the biggest challenge. That's the lion's share of our emissions, 95% plus for AstraZeneca. So we know we need to work and incentivize and engage with our suppliers with concrete solutions to help them decarbonize too.
Absolutely, Nick. That's a very good point to bring you in on that Scope 3 question. I mean, what advice would you give to an organisation on tackling its Scope 3 emissions and working with, in your case, a very broad supply chain, lots of farmers, lots of businesses that maybe don't have the capacity to invest in some of these technologies and techniques?
Well, I think it starts with something Laura just mentioned. You have to form effective partnerships back into your supply chain. You have to partner with people who bring technology to bear where you haven't got it. So all of our regenerative agriculture programs across the world, 100% of our corn supply, 100% of our stevia supply, are formed through partnerships, both up and down the supply chain. So take the US as an example. We've been partnering for the best part of 10 years with Moderator. We've got a data engine to literally capture sub-acre data on farming practices across hundreds of thousands of acres in the US. We can use that data and partner with our customers to put agronomists in the field to help farmers farm more sustainably. And by sustainably, we mean have a lower climate impact, improve their yields, and therefore make it economically sustainable for them as well. So partnership up and down the supply chain, because the reality is when you're dealing with 30% of the climate load in the world, if we don't all win, everybody loses.
Yeah.
Now that's a big scale challenge. You go to China, where stevia is made by smallholder farmers who are basically using paper to gather data. We partner with Earthwatch, so using NGOs, partner with a local university to help farmers farm in a different way. And the biggest impact we've had on China is they've reduced the use of fertilizers by over 70% and increased yields. Massive reduction in climate impact and massively more productive for the farmers. They're making more money. But that can only be done by forming partnerships for the common good.
And does that message have a receptive audience? Do you ever see any resistance amongst your supplier base to, might be slightly cliched view, but a farmer going, someone's coming in and telling me what to do, kind of thing, or does the argument broadly cut through that this will make you more money?
it's not consistent. I mean, you have to accept that people are going to react in very, very different ways, and you have to find a way to educate and demonstrate to them that it's for the good of both parties, and therefore it takes time. The point earlier about not overreacting to short-term fads. I mean, we've been at this for 10 years in the US. We're only scratching the surface. We've been at it for 3 or 4 years in China, but it's only starting to have an impact. So these are decade-long programs, and you have to commit to them for the longer term, whilst balancing the need to make money today.
Yeah, absolutely. Tim, we've heard from several of the panel here that there is there's quite a fundamental and I think underappreciated technology shift happening here in terms of the ability to access the data and the close monitoring of what's going on in corporate supply chains. Do you think that's underappreciated, and what more can be done to sort of get people to recognise that we can start to understand, where we need to take action in what are still sprawling global supply chains?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know if I think sometimes if people talk about technology in isolation, it is not the solution in and of itself. It requires, the other elements to input into the technology. But I certainly feel like technology has the scaling potential and the ability to kind of understand the data, interpret data to make better decisions, right? As businesses, I think that it's going to play a major part in solving some of the challenges, the climate-related challenges, in the speed and the pace that it needs to. So I think a lot of good can come out of that, but it is a component in the piece rather than the only thing.
So you need the action on top of it. I mean, we see this with sort of deforestation and so on. You can have the satellite tracking, but unless you've got the enforcement on the ground, it's not really going to change anything. Absolutely right. And just on a brief note on the EUDR, which is that regulation which you kind of mentioned with satellite tracking, we're seeing that as a way that it's reached more companies and more supply chains to have to take some kind of affirmative, positive action because there's a regulation associated with it. So it's created complexity, but by taking action, I think people are realizing that better understanding their value chains is helping them as a business. So now people want to do more sort of tier N risk analysis. They want to engage their suppliers more effectively because they all rely on it. So that's been a good technological driver that has had positive business impacts. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm a journalist by training, and I have to say you're all being far too positive. So I'm going to try and draw out some negatives here or some challenges. I mean, we are, despite all this progress, global emissions are still rising. Climate impacts are intensifying all around the world, and I haven't checked my updates yet this morning in detail, but World War III seems it could come along any minute now. And the world's most powerful politician is a climate denier. We are, you can make a sort of counter argument that we're really not in a very good place. I mean, what does the panel see as the biggest challenges or the biggest sort of alarms on their radar at the moment? And we'll mix it up. We'll go to Laura first on this one.
Thanks, James. I think there are a couple of challenges that we face. Certainly, the supply chain decarbonisation is challenging. We have the aim right now to halve our entire value chain emissions by 50% by 2030. That's 5 years away, and that represents about 95% of our emissions. So we've done a great job in reducing the emissions from our global R&D manufacturing sites and our fleet. We can directly control that. We can say to people, you need to switch to EVs. We can switch to clean heat, to clean energy, to power and our sites and the making of medicines. But we also need to now engage and continue to engage. We've been doing this for some time with our suppliers. So actually, we have some pretty strict and high expectations of our suppliers, and if they don't convert and don't set science-based targets, we will no longer work with them.
And have you had to do that? Have you had to have those conversations? Just, look, sorry, this isn't working because you're not in line with what we need.
I think we're in a phase now where we have communicated those expectations very clearly, and of course we need to let people have the time to, to convert, to set science-based targets. It's not something you can do overnight, but the expectations are very clear. And actually, together with our peers through the SMI, the group I mentioned earlier, the collaboration, we've actually written to our joint suppliers with expectations around science-based targets, but also around reductions in use of water, carbon, heat, etc. So I think we're taking a pretty strong stance, but it will take time, and it remains a challenge.
Yeah.
I think the other point, just very briefly, is around incentives. I think someone mentioned earlier, that there is a premium for renewables or for more sustainable products. And so we need to create, as an industry, market demand signals. We need to come together to do that, so that the procurement of more renewable sources, more materials and energy is more cost effective, and so that people are incentivized to switch. And there's a government policy piece here too.
Absolutely. Dara, where do you see the main pain points currently? What keeps you awake at night?
Yes, so as an advisory firm that works with over 1,000 companies, we see a lot of challenges. So we see the challenges around scope 3 and supply chain, like to be mentioned, challenges around data. But I think the real challenge we're seeing, especially in this environment, is around how do you show that return on investment of these sustainability-related projects in a world where, as, let's say, an executive team, you're worrying about existential challenges to do with the increase in your cost base from tariffs, when you're worried about geopolitical tensions, when you're also thinking about AI and technology going forwards. And I think, where we've seen companies really sort of make progress around, helping to show this business value is really getting deeper on the data, be able to, for example, quantify the financial impact of let's say it's a physical climate risk hazard, not just the damage to your assets, but also the quantification of the disruption to business continuity, which a lot of people forget about.
And is the worry about those returns, is that a perception problem? Because we hear over and over again that these technologies will save you money, that there is a good return, there is a good payback, or is this still a problem? Is there still, in too many areas, a premium attached, and that the payback periods are too long?
So I think, there's a creaming curve of the opportunities. So they're very clear, let's say, in the internal cost base. There are very clear NPV positive initiatives, for example, around energy efficiency savings or material cost savings. And we talked about, in some cases, like we see in India, by moving to renewable energy PPAs, you can actually save a lot of cost. I think it's the next frontier of bigger, more sort of higher investment opportunities that people are struggling with. And it's about how do you quantify the potential impact to your business of not doing that.
Absolutely.
So I think that's where people are really struggling.
The next phase. Nick, I saw you nodding along there. Would you concur that's that there's established clean technologies and things that you can do and get a return, but it's some of the more challenging cutting edge stuff maybe?
Yeah, I mean, look, all new technology has a cost curve. So if you're purely dealing with today's returns, you're going to focus on established technologies, and we have to balance off our investments across the medium term as well. That's more difficult in today's world. Coming back to your original question, there's no doubt that geopolitical fragmentation is impacting the world massively from a short-term focus perspective. But it's also having massive impact on the climate agenda longer term, because it's impossible to get a consistent way of thinking about climate change on a global basis. A very sort of practical example for you, the proliferation of reporting systems. We have created an industry sort of reporting environmental data that is consuming a huge amount of unnecessary resource. I mean, go and read our annual report. How many pages there are on reporting. We're putting too much effort into that and too little effort into actually having a positive impact. So the short-term nature of political fragmentation and the longer-term inability to create common systems, common approaches, a common view of how we get enough green energy availability for companies to access. In the US, we've had to invest in wind farms in Texas to power plants in Indiana. That's nuts when you think about the challenges we're facing. So the whole geopolitical situation is clearly one of our biggest challenges. Now, in that regard, though, our belief at least is you've got to control what you can control.
Yeah.
So we're not changing our commitment. We may have to sort of rebalance climate resilience, etc., in the near term, but it doesn't change our commitment to what we think is going to sustain the business for the longer term.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to follow up on another sort of potential cause of concern, I mean, this is a slightly daft question, but as a company in the food business, how worried are you about escalating climate impacts? I mean, just in the UK alone, we're in drought in multiple parts of the country already, little end in sight to that. I mean, how big a threat is that in the long term to the sector in which you work?
A massive. But I mean, existentially, it's a much bigger threat for humanity in general. So, we're 23 crop cycles away from 2050. By then, we're going to have to produce at least 30% more food annually in the world. So how do you do that without massive climate change in the industry? Because we're going to have to produce more for less, and that's not going to come from doing what we've already done. And time is running out.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'd love stats like that. We are 23 crop cycles away from 2050. Absolutely sobering. Another way of looking at it is it's every 4 months is now 1% of the available time to 2050. So whilst you're preparing your next report or responding to a government consultation, another percent just ticks by of the time we have left to hit these targets. It's slightly terrifying when it's put that way. Paul, come to you next. I mean, what's on your radar that you're concerned about, and the challenges that you're seeing?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Well, my biggest concern, and the team, excuse me, is it's always really disingenuous leadership, really. So we deal with a lot of blue chips. We read the reports. The reports just don't represent the reality. Now, I won't mention the name of the company, but they have a 20-page sustainability report, and you go and see the factory, and I kid you not, there's a polystyrene from the floor to the ceiling, which is going to last for 3 hours. So, and I agree with Laura as well that there are no rewards for publicating, and there's no consequences.
So your concern is that they're greenwashing a lot of organisations is still pretty endemic.
Completely, it's widespread, and I see it because I do most of the closing of the big orders for the sales team. What they care about most of all is the price. I understand that. So this is why I accepted that a number of years ago, which is why we've laser focused on that price. Now the price is sorted, then there's still a big challenge because they will tell us we're not going to deal with it. The first thing these people will say is, no matter what their sustainability report looks like, no matter what company, is how much is it? And there's a perception straight away. The barrier's almost down. As soon as you mention, that's why I don't talk about sustainability.
Sorry, Paul, keep your mic a bit closer to your mouth. Sorry.
That's almost why I don't say the word sustainability anymore, because this barrier comes down as an immediate negativity, or it can't be scaled. So
and is a lot of that. I think somebody on the earlier stage was mentioning that inertia being an issue, just a sense of this is the way we've always done things, and that almost cultural resistance to change, even when there is a potentially better option available.
Yeah, there's just wholesale, widespread global acceptance of what we're doing to the planet, and I think there are no rewards, as I said, to repeat, and there are no consequences at the moment. And I think if you bring that in, we should see a change quite quickly.
Absolutely.
How you police that, I don't know.
Tim, same question to you, actually. I mean, any particular areas of real obstacles to progress that you're seeing, and to put up a more positive spin on it, how do you see those? How are you addressing those? How are you looking to overcome them?
I think the obstacles have been well articulated already on the panel. I think there's a balance. Regulation has a place, and I do think that the deforestation-free regulation has forced companies to act in a way that is actually going to be net positive for the forests, of course, the farmers, and I think it's the first stage in getting a better view of data that's going to help to make better decisions overall in how value chains operate, and I think it does require a change now. I think we can't carry on as we are because the result will be the same, but I do see some shoots of positivity coming from that kind of action. I agree there's been probably a lot of regulation for people to deal with, but there's a few certain ones that seem to be making quite an impact, and the EU therefore are making a bit of a stand globally through that kind of regulation. So I do see positivity in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Dora, I mean, would you share that? I mean, particularly in the UK at the moment, we just heard from Chris Stark earlier, there's an awful lot of what seems like broadly positive policy interventions coming through. There does seem to be that policy focus. Do you think we're seeing progress on that front? And is that feeding through into corporate action?
Well, as I said earlier, I think compliance is definitely a key priority for companies, in addition to competitiveness and resilience. And we are seeing across the markets, obviously we had the EU Omnibus, under the guise of making things more simple, perhaps in some circumstances be seen as taking a step back. But we are seeing in other markets, I can talk about what's happening in the Middle East, in the UAE with their climate decree where private companies are going to have to sort of report. We're also seeing what's happening with the ISSB in various countries in Asia, Singapore, Japan, Australia, as well as what's happening in Latin America, Mexico.
Yeah.
So we are seeing some action, I would say, more in some of those emerging markets. And it's something that will continue to be a priority for companies because you just have to comply.
Yeah, absolutely. Nick, what would you like to see from policymakers? I think you touched upon the reporting burden maybe overlapping too much. Any particular areas you want to see reform?
I mean, for me, the most important thing would be a common approach to reporting.
Yeah.
One set of standards, I absolutely agree with Tim. There's a lot of good stuff, but there's a lot of good stuff that overlaps. And, we've got people looking at multiple reporting systems. So one common approach would be a good start. One common approach to driving capacity for the key components of a greener energy system globally would really help. Now, that's a big ask, I understand that, but just some common goals that we can all get behind and create fact-based views on positive intervention can only help. We don't solve the problem by reporting more. We solve the problem by reporting the right stuff and demonstrating that we've taken the right actions.
Yeah. Laura, I think you were nodding along in concurrence with that one.
Yeah, I fully agree with the point around the need to harmonise reporting standards. I'm going to give another spin, though, on this, or another take on this, in terms of what can policymakers do. Policymakers need to invest in health as a strategic asset for countries.
Yeah.
And that might feel a bit far-fetched from the conversation, but it's not. Because if you're healthy, you're productive, you can support economic growth, you can contribute to society, and in keeping healthy and staying healthy, you're a greener person, you're a greener patient. The delivery of patient care is significant, okay? We're talking here healthcare emissions equivalent to the size of a country like Belgium. So by staying out the hospital through government and policymaker investment in early detection and better treatment of disease early, nipping things in the bud, healthcare systems, not sick care systems, we can keep people well out the hospital and we can drive down emissions while also driving economic growth and productivity. So green patient is a healthy patient.
Interesting, and it really highlights the holistic nature of it. I suppose you could bring in sort of active travel and air pollution and all these other factors to that. Are you encouraged at all by what you've seen from the government in recent months? I mean, as Chris Stark was setting out earlier, it is a real area of focus. Are you seeing a bit of progress on that front, or more to do?
I mean, I think all business crave stability and a stable policy environment. We're a UK headquartered company, one of the biggest companies in the UK, but also a very global company. So we work with governments all around the world, and actually the WHO has brought together over 100 governments that have committed to delivering climate-friendly and sustainable and resilient health systems. So of course we look at the UK, but we also work with multiple governments, and it's actually really positive to see governments commit to lower carbon healthcare delivery.
Absolutely. Paul, I think the industrial strategy yesterday, had a commitment to a new circular economy strategy is in the pipeline. We've seen movements on sort of tackling single-use plastic, on extended producer responsibility. I mean, are you broadly satisfied with the direction at the moment, or what more would you like to see?
No, absolutely I am, and we've been lucky that we've been We won a £500,000 Smart Innovate grant recently, so the government are very supportive of our aims, and we also won a £1.1 million Innovate loan, which helped us fund our own raw materials plant, which brought the raw material cost down by 70%, and now we use 4 million kilos of local farmers' agricultural waste. So they're really supportive. It's the businesses, and I think for policy for me, that I would, over certain value, I would have the sustainability reports of businesses audited independently, and they should accompany that. That report should be accompanied on their website, and we'll see how real they are then.
And it does seem to be edging in that direction there. We're seeing transition plans and other things that are going to be legally required soon, or they keep saying that. Hopefully we will get there. Tim, just finally, last question to you. Sorry, the same question to you. What policy interventions would you like to see? I mean, you touched on the deforestation stuff. Anything further that you think could improve the efforts to tackle Scope 3?
I think the mood music in this country from the latest incumbents, they seem to have set a bit more intent around that. We'll see what comes from it, but I think there's a lot of positive intent and clearly some good case study examples of how they're helping smaller and mid-sized businesses in that regard. And I'm on a panel on the regenerative agriculture one later, which there's some phenomenal progress being made there, but of course it needs to be made as quickly as possible. So yeah.
Excellent. I think I'm being told we need to wrap up fairly soon as we're trying to get the agenda back on time. So I'm just going to wrap up kind of where we started, basically. Given that there does seem to be, even if it is just more constructed than real, a backlash against net zero action, what would the panel's recommendations be on how to fight back, how to sort of cut through that noise and make sure that policymakers, investors, key decision makers, and of course the public as a whole recognise that you are still committed and the progress is still being made and there is still a compelling business case for this. Paul, come to you first.
Yeah, on a personal note, investment. You know, we have a challenge that we are an industrial that rely on angel investment because people don't invest in business, or funds don't invest in business until they're profitable. So it's a virtuous circle, really. So, but I know from my interactions with all the investors that we've got, there's a huge passion for the majority of the public that they want to make a positive change, and I think hopefully this is a blip and we'll move on and things will carry on.
Improving that early stage capital ecosystem. Yeah, lots of startups would absolutely echo that. Dara?
I think for me it comes down to, especially in this landscape where companies are really tight on financials, it's basically around looking around what's in your control and can you create value either through reducing cost, embedding sustainability in your products to get a green premium, or mitigating or adapting to climate risk, and really taking a hard look to see if there are some win-win initiatives that you can implement now that will put you in good stead, especially when you take the 5 to 10 year time frame.
See, Tim, what would your pitch be to lead that fight back against some of these noises off?
Well, I think we've heard on the panel, for example, AstraZeneca getting together with their quote-unquote competitors for the greater good. That gives great hope. I think those kind of initiatives are phenomenal, and we're seeing more and more of that, and that leads to standardisation, and that means we can accelerate in progress. So thanks.
I see. Laura, is there a debate about the terminology here? Is net zero helpful? Should we be looking more broadly at those kind of harder-edged resilience terms and to kind of push back against these criticisms?
I think terms like net zero are helpful when they're backed by science, driven frameworks that help organisations move together towards a common goal, and there's standardisation about what great looks like and how to get there. I think, nature positive, this positive, neutral, all the rest of it, there's too much out there and it confuses people and people switch off. I think it's really about, reducing your footprint, your environmental footprint, whether it's, carbon, heat, plastics, packaging, water, and reducing your footprint and looking at how you can deliver growth in the short, medium and long term in a way that is less dependent on the planet's resources.
Absolutely. And Nick, just to give you the final word, if you had a sort of political leader or an investor here who was a bit sceptical on this agenda and saying, look, why are you wasting your money on this? What would be your response?
Look at the data. I mean, the days of climate change being something of a future problem have gone. I mean, all the facts point towards the need to take positive action together today. And that's a simple truth, whether it be the few crop cycles we've got to solve for or whatever the measure is. I love the idea of a healthy patient being a green patient, by the way. That plays right into the food industry as well. You know, the single biggest thing we could do in the food industry to reduce consumption is to reduce food waste. 30% of the food across the world today is wasted. That can't be good for anybody, right? There are so many clear points of fact out there impacting people's lives today. It's undeniable. What we have to do is control what we can control. To Dara's point, you know, focus on efficient climate change in the near term whilst investing for the longer term, and critically is building partnerships where you win together.
Yeah.
Because if we all win, everything will be fine. There are no winners and losers here. There are only losers or only winners.
Absolutely. What a fantastic place to finish. Thank you so much to the panel. Thanks to Nick, to Tim, to Paul, to Dara and to Laura. Thank you for your time. Sorry we didn't get a chance for any questions, but we've got us back on time for the rest of the day. So thank you all. Thanks for listening. Thanks once again.